for joining us this afternoon. Today we are going to be leading you through a virtual post-fire assessment field day. And we're presenting you this, we're from the NRCS Natural Resources Conservation Service and the Resource Conservation District of Monterey County. So I just wanted to start out by introducing ourselves, starting with the folks from NRCS and the RCD. And then going on to the students and teachers. And for the students, if you could all say your full name, your school, and your grade, that would be wonderful. So my name is Megan Barker. I'm an environmental scientist at the Resource Conservation District, or RCD, of Monterey County. And I'm happy to be here today. Laura, will you introduce yourself next, please?
Thanks, Megan. Hi, everybody. My name is Laura Murphy, and I'm a soil scientist. I also work for the Resource Conservation District in Monterey County. And before we hand it to the NRCS, there's one other RCD member here. Paul, if you can introduce yourself.
I'm Paul Robbins. I'm the executive director and super excited to go through this with you all, but I will not be presenting. I'm just going to be digging it. So thanks for having me.
Now on to the NRCS. Drew?
Hey everybody, my name's Drew Mather, and I'm a soil conservationist in Salinas and also in Capitola and Half Moon Bay with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Really happy to have everyone here. Thanks for inviting us to do this. Really excited as well.
Great. And you guys know me, Letty Hernandez, you're our program coordinator. We can go around and have students introduce themselves. So if we can start with Anaí.
Hi, my name is Anaí Benavides. I'm a junior this year and I am from Gonzales High School.
Melissa, you're up.
Hi, my name is Melissa Jaime. I'm a sophomore at Greenfield High School.
Diego.
Hi everybody, my name is Diego Martinez and I'm a junior at Alice High School.
All right, Daniela.
Hi, my name is Daniela Rodriguez and I am a junior at Greenfield High.
Jackie. Can you introduce yourself? Are you there? Jackie, do you want to introduce yourself? All right, we can move on to Tomas.
My name is Tomas Vasquez, and I'm a junior at Elsa High.
Valeria.
Hi everyone, my name is Valeria. I am a sophomore at Gonzales High School.
Samantha.
Hi, my name is Samantha Oliva. I am a sophomore at Gonzales High School.
Jasleen.
Hi, my name is Jasmine Rodriguez. I'm a junior at Gonzales High.
JD.
Hello, my name is JD Solis. I'm a 11th grader at Elsa High.
Stacy. If you can turn your video on too while you introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Hi, my name is Stacy. I'm a senior at Elsa High School.
Vanelli.
Hi, my name is Benelli Garcia. I'm a sophomore at Gonzales High.
Jose.
Hi, my name is Jose Mendoza. I'm a junior in Greenfield High School.
Andrea. Oh, We may have lost her.
It looks like she might have got disconnected. I just readmitted her.
Yeah. We can go back to Jackie if you want to do your introduction.
Yeah, sorry, I was on a phone call.
It's okay.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jackie Dunhill, and I'm a junior at Elisa High School.
All right. Andrea, can you introduce yourself? If not, we can move on.
Yes,
Oh, there
I
she
can
is.
introduce myself. Hi.
Perfect. Can you tell us what grade and school you're from? Are you there, Andrea? I don't think we heard you. Okay, I guess we can move on then. Thank you all for being here. We're gonna get started here with the presentation. Actually, teachers, did you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Mr. Maraska here from Gonzales High School.
I'm Mrs. Villasenor from Greenfield High School.
Mrs. Solis from Alisa High School. Good afternoon.
Perfect. All right, take it away, Megan. You're muted.
If you are still planning on recording.
Yes, we've started recording.
Okay. Perfect. Great. Thank you. So today we'd like to just lead off the PowerPoint by telling you guys a little bit about the services that our agencies provide, both the USDA, NRCS, and the RCD. And hopefully the acronyms won't be too hard to get. Basically, Natural Resources Conservation Service is NRCS, and the Resource Conservation District is RCD. So you'll hear those a lot. So basically, the Natural Resources Conservation Service and the Resource Conservation District, we provide a number of services related to agriculture, forestry, habitat, conservation, and education in the Monterey County and Santa Cruz County areas. We provide trainings to farmers in both English and Spanish about soil and nutrient management, irrigation efficiency, farm and ranch management, and habitat conservation. We also provide engineering assistance to ranchers, farmers, and landowners. And most recently, we've expanded our forest health and fire fuels management services to serve the needs of Monterey and Santa Cruz County because of the recent fires. So, just wanted to start out by showing you guys a little bit about the fires that hit our area in 2020, as you're probably well aware of. In Santa Cruz County, we had the CZU fire, which stands for Cruz Unit Fire, and this was a fire started by several different lightning strikes. And then the Monterey County area, we had the River Fire, the Carmel Fire, and the Dolan Fire at Big Sur. So just real quick, I just wanted to kind of show you guys where these different fires happened to give you the lay of the land. The River Fire happened over by River Road in Gonzales. So some of you in the Salinas Valley may have seen the smoke up on the mountains. Obviously, we had really bad air quality from that. And then the Carmel Fire was in the Carmel Valley, Kashawa area. The Dolan Fire, as I mentioned, was out on the Big Sur coast. And this fire is actually still, there's a small portion of it that's still burning at least as of December 3rd, but it's 98% contained. And then there was the CZU fire, as I mentioned, in Santa Cruz, which was started by a number of different lightning strikes that happened in the mountains area, and then it spread to a larger fire area. So now I'd like to hand it over to Laura, who's going to just go into fire ecology in California briefly, just to help us frame this conversation a bit.
Thanks, Megan. Hey again, everybody. So fire ecology in California is something you could spend your whole lifetime studying and working on, but really briefly, we want to have a big picture perspective as we go into this conversation about fire. We're talking about fire and assessments of communities after a fire, landscapes after a fire, and we want to keep in mind that while fire can be destructive, fire is a natural resource, just like wind, water, and can also be creative. And that here in California, what we have are landscapes and plant ecosystems, communities that are adapted to fire and that have experienced fire periodically at different intensities over many, many, many generations. So it's a natural part of the ecosystem here. And plant communities, different types of trees, different types of individual species as well as systems exhibit adaptations to fire, which are maybe different from one another. For example, we can talk about the knobcone pine versus the redwood. The knobcone pine is an example of a fire resilient species. The way that it's resilient is that it's adapted to keep its seeds in a very tightly closed cone. And that cone never opens until it has been exposed to fire. So the tree grows and it matures and it creates seeds year after year after year, but those seeds are never able to sprout until a fire comes through. The trees will burn up, but those seeds then will finally be released and they're able to sprout and grow again into a new knobcone pine. Redwood is an example of a fire-resistant species. The adaptation that redwood exhibits to fire is that it resists being burned up. It stores a lot of moisture in its body, in the trunk of the tree. It has a very thick bark, and it is able to withstand fire to a great degree. And after a fire comes through and burns a redwood tree, if it survives, it will resprout vigorously, sending out all kinds of new growth. And in that way, it is resistant to fire. So as we move forward, you guys are looking at going into college probably soon, starting your careers. And if that career involves landscape and forest management, natural resource considerations, it's a really good time now to start thinking about what do we know about these adaptations, about these fire habits, and what existing knowledge is there for us to pull from. And there's a lot of traditional ecological knowledge around fire management, using fire as a tool in the landscape. And this past 100 years or more of very active fire suppression is a policy that has allowed fuels to build up in our forests and create a situation where it's very difficult for us to manage fires, but we have the opportunity to turn that around, and using things like prescribed burns and policies and land management planning, which involves accepting fire and adapting and living with fire, is a way for us to move forward as we face the challenges posed also by climate change, which changes our precipitation patterns, results in more drought, higher temperatures, drier conditions in summer, and things that will also accelerate and impact us around fire.
Great, thank you, Laura. So now I'd like to dive into the post-fire assessments and just tell you all what they're all about. So basically, the purpose of a post-fire assessment, as we discussed, this area has been hard hit by fires last summer and fall. And so the purpose of these visits is to assist landowners who've had property damage or their homes have burned down, and to help them give them unbiased professional advice in erosion control and vegetation maintenance on their property. So a specialist like Drew Mather, who you're going to hear from today, will go and assess the property, assess the fire damage, and make recommendations based on that, and also connect the landowner with available resources that could help them repair any damages. So the first thing that a specialist needs to be sure of before entering your property or meeting with a landowner is to assess the safety of that property. We can't emphasize enough how dangerous a post-fire site can be. Even if it looks like there's, the fire's out, there's no active flames that you can see, there can still be burning embers underneath the soil, hidden below ash that you could fall into, pitfalls. There could be tripping hazards, there could be fallen trees, and there could be a number of different hazards, unstable soil. So it's really important for the specialists going in to perform the post-fire assessment to think about all these things before he or she begins walking around with the landowner. So the next thing, of course, is to meet the landowner and to hear their story. And we can't emphasize enough the importance of taking the time to listen to the landowner and being compassionate, because basically these landowners have been through a lot. Some of them have lost their homes. They've been through a scary situation being near the fire, and they have property damage. So often they can be kind of emotional or just need somebody to listen. So we want to emphasize that those soft skills, if you will. And then the other thing that we wanted to kind of mention is that these post-fire assessments could involve many different types of careers. So we could have geologists going out to survey, a mudslide. It could be an erosion control specialist like this gentleman here, Rich Cassell, pictured in this photo. Arborists can go in and determine what trees need to come out and can remove those. And we have foresters, engineers, soil conservationists, etc. So there's a number of careers that could be doing these types of assessments. And then real quick, I just wanted to mention, you all should have a copy of this post-fire assessment data sheet. And basically, the reason we just wanted to include this was to show you the actual sheet that our specialists will use when they go into the field and meet with the landowners, and they'll fill out these data sheets. So as we're going through this presentation, we just want you to see that you're actually learning how to complete one of these sheets, and that you could, in essence, do what these specialists are doing by going out and evaluating property. So now I'd like to hand it over to Drew, who's going to talk about how to assess burn severity on a property.
All right. Well, thanks, Megan, and thanks, Laura, for the great introduction on these topics. And so before we dive in, just to give you a sort of a broad view of everything that we're going to be covering today, the topic of burn severity and also tree hazard and slope and erosion, they're all dealt with in some other webinars that have been done. And this particular topic of burn severity, I'm taking from a registered professional forester. His name is Steve Otten. And I believe Letty actually has the link that you can go to see his presentation, which goes into much more detail about burn severity than I'm going to be able to do today. So we're going to be going through a lot of these concepts kind of quickly. It would be great if we could all be out in the field together to do this, but unfortunately this is going to have to be the next best thing. So if you look at that picture in front of you to the right, probably the first thing that jumps out at you, there may be a couple of things that jump out at you. First thing is that maybe that little green patch there where Megan's running her cursor, and maybe some of those darker trees maybe in the foreground and also in the sort of the mid-ground there on those gray slopes. So when you go to a site, the first thing that you want to try and do is to assess how severe the burn was for the landowner, because a lot of times the landowner is going to be really concerned about trees and erosion and how badly his or her soils got burned. And so we're gonna dive into that. There are four main categories: the low, moderate, high, and very high burn severities. And a lot of your focus and your observational skills will go towards the trees. And we're gonna focus in on that for a few minutes here. And then the other aspect of it is how much vegetation's left, how much got burned, and then your ground cover and your soils and how well they withstood the burns. So again, if you look on that picture on the right, we're taking a very broad view, and that green area is more of our low severity burn. As you move out and you start to see those orange, maybe reddish colors, that's where we start to move into a moderate burn severity. as we get out beyond those orange colors, we start to lose a lot of the vegetation, and then we start to get into more of a high burn severity as we go maybe further up slope in towards the ridge tops. And then as we get to the ridge tops, and I'm actually standing on a ridge top here on Swanton Pacific Ranch, looking out across. So in the foreground there, you can see I'm actually looking down into a very high burn severity. So again, we're gonna drill in here in just a moment, but this is the quote unquote bird's eye view. So Megan, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and change to the next slide. So let's dive into low burn severity. And incidentally, a lot of what happened on the CZU fire, as well as the river and Dolan fires, were in this category, especially as you got closer towards the coast. And again, we're looking at the bark of the tree, and typically you would not see anything above 5 feet as a burn scar on that trunk of that tree. So maybe only up to about 5 feet. And then some ground cover issues, you probably would only see some gray ash, some black ash, not anything approaching white or orange as we get to those higher burn severity situations. And a lot of people in this situation will ask, well, are these trees going to make it? And as a soil conservationist, I don't make those determinations, and I make sure that I tell folks that that's not up to me. It's better to have an arborist or a registered professional forester make those calls. But typically on a low burn severity site like this one, where you still have a lot of green, you still have a lot of leaf cover and understory, most of the time those trees are going to be just fine. So Megan, if you would, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So now we're moving out of that green area. We're starting to get into more of that orange reddish area. We still have some canopy, but as you look at that picture in the center, there's a white tree there, and you can kind of see, I think Megan, if you wouldn't mind putting your cursor on that tree, you can see that the burn scar marks go up about a third of the way up that tree, possibly getting closer to half up the base of that tree. So that's your first indicator that you're dealing with a little bit more significant burn that happened on the landscape. The smaller trees are probably going to die, as opposed to on that low burn severity. Probably most of the smaller trees will be fine. And then you also have a tendency to have more of an orange ash color in this, and it's a little bit harder to see in this example. Mainly, this is here for you to see the tree scarring or the burn marks on the tree trunks. So again, just use this as a framework for assessing very broadly the moderate burn severity. And let's go ahead and move on to the high. So high is where the burn marks on those trees can sometimes go almost to a half to 3/4 of the tree itself. So again, this is where the what we call these ladder fuels have basically lit the canopy on fire, and you get this really high up scorching on the tree. And the smaller trees in these events, they typically don't make it. Some may. Understory, the shrubs and the grasses, they've basically been all burnt up. They've been consumed. And you start to get into this orange ash color, white ash material, and not quite to that winter wonderland snow type experience, which we're going to get to in just a moment. But you definitely notice a difference there by walking into a high burn severity environment. All right, so again, let's just keep that in mind for your framework now for low, moderate, and high. And now we get to the very high, and this is very stark, what we call moonscape landscapes, where basically all of the understory has been burnt up. It's turned to a white ash, which is indicative of a very hot burn. And that picture on the right or on the far right is a redwood. and it's still has a little bit of canopy there, but it's burned very hot almost all the way. I guess, yeah, it has burned all the way up the tree. And the tree, the picture on the left is a knob cone pine, and Laura mentioned the knob cones as being resilient to fire. They're not necessarily resistant to fire. So the resiliency of this knob cone species is showing here, where the cones are going to be opening up and they'll be releasing their seed now. And this landscape will be able to regenerate, even though it looks like nothing could nothing could grow there anymore because of the high intensity of fire that came through. But mainly it's the non-redwood trees that are going to die. Any redwoods, the smaller ones may die, but most of the time, redwoods are an incredible species of plant. We could spend a long time talking about the specialness of redwoods, but if you do check out that presentation by Steve Otten, he'll go into great detail about the redwoods. So that gives you a very broad perspective of low, moderate, high, and very high severity. So what we'd like to do now is to give you a try. And this is not pass or fail, but we do have some polls set up. I think that Letty's going to go ahead and start a poll on the next questions that we're going to bring up. So for this one, think about what we just talked about. You see a lot of green there. What do you think in terms of burn severity? What would you say, just based on what we just talked about, what would you say is the burn severity there? Is it low, moderate, high, or very high? I'll give you a second to think about it. We had a chance to hit your buttons like on Jeopardy. All right.
We have about 12 out of 21.
12 out of 21, okay. Getting close to half. Maybe another 5 seconds. What do you guys think?
All right.
All right, so we have the majority saying that it was a low severity burn. We have some that are saying it's moderate, and some high, and some very high. So yeah, so in terms of how I see this, and again, I'm not a professional forester, but I have been out on a number of sites with professional foresters. And when you have a lot of green here, a lot of canopy still covering the trees, it's hard to see the burn severity on the barks themselves, or on the trees themselves. But this is considered probably between a low to moderate, and I would probably tend towards a low severity burn here. So so yeah, that's you guys are and gals are getting into it. So let's see the next one. All right, so this one's a little challenging. What I'd like for you to do you see that little green patch there, kind of center right? Yeah, thanks Megan for pointing that out. Go ahead and ignore that. That's kind of a weird anomaly on the landscape. Look at the broad picture there where you see sort of those brownish, reddish colors, and make that determination on an entire hill slope based on those colors, as well as how the trees look. All right. So is it low, moderate, high, or very high? I'll give you guys a minute to think about that, and gals. How are we doing, Letty?
We have about 72% of students voting, so if you guys can just
All right.
make a choice there. Missing a few of you.
So yeah, just that broad landscape there. Okay. And so the majority of you said that that was a high burn severity, with some saying it was moderate. And I think that's pretty good. That I would classify that between a high to maybe even a very high burn severity, but because of still the presence of the canopy there, yeah, I would tend to say that's more of a high burn severity. But I can see where you might have, if you had looked at those greener areas, you might have said moderate. But I think you guys are getting the hang of this. So let's go to our last example. And don't be discouraged if you didn't answer exactly correctly. So this next one, I'm not going to give it any introduction. We'll leave it there and see what you guys think. Is this low, moderate, high, or very high?
All right, just putting in a couple more votes there. Maybe one more vote. Somebody's missing. 5 more seconds.
All right. What do you guys think? All right. So we had 1 for moderate, we had 3 for high, and 14 for very high. So yeah, that's with the majority there. I would agree that is a very high severity burn. This is I can see where maybe some of you might have thought that because of the ash layer maybe being a darker color, you might have tended towards a high to moderate. And I honestly don't know why the ash color isn't a whiter color on this. Maybe it's indicative of a later period. Like I took this picture maybe 2.5 weeks ago. This is on top of, this is actually behind that bird's eye picture, the very first picture for burn severity. But yeah, there's nothing left of the canopy. These are knobcone pines, and they're basically all burned to the tops here. And as we mentioned, there is some potential for life in these areas. I believe these are sprouters from either manzanita or blanking on it, madrones. I think are starting to come back, and this is without any appreciable rain whatsoever. So I think you guys did really well. You should give yourself a hand for your first attempt at determining burn severity on a person's landscape. So go to the next one. Why do we care about this? Drew, please give me a reason why we care. So it's a little, again, we're drilling in on a very broad topic, and we're trying to zero in on the tree component, because that's what a lot of people care about. Is a tree going to fall in my house? Am I going to need to take these trees out at a later time? That's really where a lot of the discussion comes after a fire. And so when you know the burn severity, you can make some educated guesses as to what's going to happen to some of these trees. Not being a forester, really an arborist or a professional forester would need to make those calls. You can see on the left here, a forester is putting his pocket knife into what we call the cambium layer of the tree to see if there's any live tissue still there even after burn. And a lot of times there is, because the burn severity, as you can see in the background there's still a lot of green, there's still a lot of canopy. It hasn't burned all the way into what we call the cambium layer, which carries a lot of the nutrients, or all the nutrients for the tree. In the middle, there's a madrone. It's been marked. You can see that little green pea. That's by PG&E. They're going to take that out because it's threatening their power lines. And then, like Laura mentioned, redwoods being a resilient species, or I'm sorry, a fire. I believe you said a fire resilient species.
They're
Redwoods have a
resistant,
very.
Drew, but they
Is it
also
resistant?
exhibit this characteristic of resilience in resprouting.
Thank you for that. So on the right, you can see that redwood exhibiting this resilience as well as resistance to the fire. So those are going to be future branches on that redwood tree. It did get burned probably to a moderate level, and so it's encouraging to see the redwoods being able to resprout and regenerate, even in a situation where you might think, oh, that burned a little too hot, I don't know if they'll make it. So typically the redwoods do. And so let's go on to the next slide. And so we're going to switch gears. And now, as you can imagine, hopefully you're just waiting with bated breath with your egg cartons. And I've got mine too. I'm excited to pull it out of my plastic bag. But we focused on the vegetation. Now we want to take our minds down below the vegetation and think about what's happening in the soil. And so a lot of times a landowner will ask, so do I need to be concerned about hydrophobic soils? And you may have heard that term. You may have even heard a term, maybe say claustrophobic, somebody who's very scared of being in a tight space, right? And so soils can be hydrophobic, meaning they're not able to take in water. And that is because of a situation that happens after fire. And it can also be, Laura's going to go into this in just a moment about how soils can even naturally exhibit what we call hydrophobicity. And one thing that happens after a fire, as you can imagine, there's a lot of vegetation on the ground that gets volatilized, as we say, and gets burned up. And when that happens, a lot of gases are released, even in the soil profile itself. And once that happens, and if it happens at a very high temperature, those gases can fill all the pore spaces in your soil. And if you have a sandy soil, if you have a kind of a loamier soil, there's bigger pore spaces. And we can go into, you can spend a whole topic on soil porosity, but the gases fill those pore spaces and they prevent the water from getting in. Just like, you know, when you have salad dressing filled with oil, you try to pour water on it, it won't go in. That's what the soil's doing. And we'll go into more detail in just a moment, but let's look at the next slide real quick. So you can see an example of what happens on the soil when it's hydrophobic, and you can see an example on the soil when it's hydrophilic. Philic from the Greek philios, meaning love. So the soils love the water, they allow it to go in. There's a term for that, and we call it infiltration. Go to the next slide. So if the soils are loving the water, there's space in between them and the water can go in. And because it's hydrophobic and the gases are filling it, they're not able to go in. So hydrophobic, hydrophilic. And so that gives you a little bit of a picture as to what's going on with the soils. And we're going to do a little exercise with you. And this is what we do actually out in the field with landowners. Unfortunately, we can't be with you out in the field to do this. So we're bringing the soils to you. And I'm going to now switch it over to Laura, who's going to take you through an introduction to our soil assessment exercise.
All right, so hi again, everybody. I'm the lucky one. I get to do the fun part. Like Drew said, unfortunately, we can't be together in the field today assessing soil in a landscape context like we would normally do. So we brought the field to you in the form of these 6 different soil samples. So please, everybody, have your soils out. Also have your cup of water with your little pipette to be able to get some water droplets. And if you've got that all around you, we're going to be going through an exercise here in a moment. But before we get started, I just want you all to take a moment to take a look at these different soil samples, to just appreciate the characteristics that you can observe about them just looking at them. There are different colors, There are different textures, there are different structures, and it's just fascinating to me as a soil scientist to see all of the diversity in soil types and soil characteristics that are there and available for us to appreciate. And then what they all might mean in terms of how we might choose to manage soils and how we can work with them. So this characteristic of hydrophobicity is what we are going to test today, although there are many other characteristics of the soil that we can test. But to do this test, which we would often do in a post-fire assessment, what we want to do is take our little pipetter filled with water, and be careful when you handle this. We don't need a great big stream of water. We just need to drop water drop by drop. And on each of these soil samples, we have 6 of them and they're all labeled with a number. We're going to go through one by one and drop just a few drops of water. 3, 4, 5 drops of water is enough. And just take a couple seconds to observe what happens when you drop the water on that sample. Letty's going to be putting up a poll, which will have a question. It's the same question for all 6 samples, and that question is going to be, is this hydrophobic or is this hydrophilic? So remember, hydrophobicity is when the soil repels water, and so the water will bead up on the surface. And hydrophilic soil is a soil that is able to infiltrate water, it absorbs the water, and that will happen quite rapidly if it is a hydrophilic soil. So go ahead, go through, put your drops of water on each of your samples, take a moment to watch what happens, and make a determination for each of them, whether this is a hydrophobic or a hydrophilic soil. And once you're finished and you've marked all of your answers in the poll, go ahead and submit that, and we'll be watching for everybody's responses to come through. And after we have those responses, we'll go through and see what we all found, and we'll talk about it more. Meanwhile, as we're going through this exercise, if anybody has any questions, feel free to speak up.
At what part after the fire is this assessment normally done?
That might be a question for Drew to answer.
So that's a great question. You know, I don't always do this with landowners unless we get to an area and it looks like they're interested in it. Most of the time, the soils, if it's in a low to moderate burn severity, most of the time the soils are going to have hydrophilicity. They're not going to repel the water. When I get into more of a high to very high burn severity, that's when I really want to encourage the landowner to see if they have that hydrophobic soil layer. So I'm actually kind of giving away a little bit of the exercise here, because that's one of the reasons why we do this this burn severity, is to give us sort of a framework to think about those soils and how they might be responding with the burn severity. But yeah, that's great. It's a great question. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I have another question too. What would happen if the soil ends up being hydrophobic? Would it not be able to grow anymore? Is the land what do you do with the land after that?
We're going to get to that.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about that.
You're anticipating. Yeah, we are going to talk about that more.
I'm sorry,
you for asking.
I jumped to conclusions.
No, that's great. Thanks for asking. Okay, so how are we doing so far? Letty, do we have at least half responding?
Not quite. Looks like we only have 5. If your poll disappeared, I know somebody wrote that in the chat. I'm not sure how I can bring it back. So unfortunately.
Okay, well, if that were happening in that case, go ahead and just keep track of your responses, write them down, make a little note for yourself on the side so that we can follow along. Get there.
It won't let me submit it.
Oh, have you answered for all of them?
Oh, there's a thingy.
Yes.
Answer all 6.
You have to go down. We have about 9 submitted. 40%. We need a few more in.
Let's aim for 50%.
45%, almost there. Don't forget to scroll down to see the last question. We can just get a couple more votes in, students. All right, 50%.
All right, we'll go with it.
Is it just mine, or does number 5 look weird when you put water?
It
looks
might
like
not just be yours. What does
looks
it look like to you?
It like Patrick stars laying on top of it.
Patchwork stars.
Like
Okay.
it's like a dots, and it's all connected, and it's like something's living on top of it.
That's a really interesting description. It's very poetic. I like it. So what I'm hearing you say is that you might be seeing some hydrophobicity in that sample. The water beads up onto the surface. It doesn't soak right in. Okay, we're gonna
hydrophilic.
Hydrophilic would mean that it would absorb the water into the soil itself.
Okay.
So we'll get to that one. We're going to go through each of these one by one. So we have our poll results up. From half of you were able to submit. And so this is great. This is really interesting. So there are a couple things to talk about here because we have a range of different responses. For each of the soil types, there's a majority who believed that it was either hydrophobic or hydrophilic, but there were also some of us who had different observations. And so it's really important to address the fact, one, that this is why we go through the process of observation. This is why as scientists, even though we might have a hypothesis or an expectation for what type of result we're going to see, it's really important for us to actually go through the process to make the observations, to do the tests, and analyze what we're really seeing in the landscape and in the context that we find ourselves. The other thing to keep in mind about context is that all of these samples came from a natural landscape environment somewhere, and they've been removed from that environment. They've been put into these little egg cartons, and they've been transported across county lines. They've been kept in different places with different humidity and temperature and been handled, right? And so now they're no longer in their natural context. And it's possible that the samples I have here in my egg carton might behave a little bit differently than they did when they were in the natural landscape that they were taken from, as well as those that are in Megan's egg carton or in Drew's, in different places and different environments. So it could be very, very legitimate, very true that they are acting differently at this point in time. But we'll go through each of them and talk about what we would anticipate the soil to have exhibited, either if it's going to be hydrophobic or hydrophilic, based on the characteristics of the landscape that we found it in. And so for these first 4 samples, actually, they were collected by Drew, and I'm going to have him talk about the landscape that they came from and what would have been his hypothesis and what were his observations of their behavior.
All right, thanks, Laura. So, so number 1 is this one. I don't know if you can you see that? Apologies, I'm on a cell phone. And so this one was taken from Boulder Creek, and it was in a forested environment that was probably in a low to moderate burn severity. And I would have expected that to be a more hydrophilic soil than a hydrophobic soil. And that's what, I don't know if you can see that on mine, but as soon as the raindrop hit, it went inside the soil profile there. Number 2 was more of a moderate to high burn severity. That was up in Bonnie Doon and up near Empire Grade. And I don't know if you can see that, but lighting's pretty terrible in my room right now. But there is a little bit of a beating still going on. And actually, when we're out in the field, you want to let the water droplets sit for a minute before you make your determination. And that's out in the field. For these samples, we felt like it was okay to go ahead and speed that up, and because they've been taken out of their natural environment in their soil zoo, if you will. And then number 3, mine went straight in. That's the ash that was in Boulder Creek, and that was a winery that a bunch of grapevines burned fairly cleanly. And the final one is a high to very high burn severity. This was taken up in Butano Creek area, right on the San Mateo and Santa Cruz County line. And parts of this, like Laura's talking about, infiltrated, and you can see there's a wetting front there. But right here, I don't know if you can see that, but it's still beating up. Apologies if I'm really screwing this up for you guys, but that one did exhibit some hydrophobicity on my end, and I've been waiting for months to be able to do this test with you guys, so it's exciting to see how these responded. So that's all I got on the first 4. I'll give it back over to Laura to finish up with her 2.
So these last 2, number 5 and number 6, are soil samples that I collected. These were from landscapes that have not recently been impacted by fires. Number 5 is a very sandy soil, and we were just discussing this. Melissa had some questions about what was happening with this soil. So this soil is from a natural landscape from a drought-adapted plant community, and we'll call that like a chaparral sage plant community, which was found on Fort Ord here in Monterey County. And what happens in these sandy soils, first of all, tend to exhibit hydrophobicity, but especially in these types of plant communities where, because the drought adaptation of these plants is to develop waxy compounds in order to conserve water, and because there isn't a high turnover of moisture in the soil, which breaks down those compounds, we see this kind of aggregation and this buildup of those waxy compounds, which then imparts the characteristic to the soil of hydrophobicity. It will eventually infiltrate water, and if you've had it sitting for long enough, you'll see that eventually that soil does start to absorb that moisture. But when you first make that droplet, it sort of coats, the sand particles coat the droplet of water, and it does not absorb right into the soil. Number 6 is a beautiful, moderately textured, loamy soil, which was taken from the Salinas Valley, right there in the center of the valley where we see all of the agriculture. This happened to be in a grassland context. This was not actively in agriculture, but this is exactly the type of soil that the Salinas Valley is prized for agriculture, and it infiltrates beautifully. My experience with this soil was there was no exhibition of hydrophobicity. It was ready to take on water, and it absorbed that water quickly and readily. And we want to see that characteristic in an agricultural setting. We want to see good infiltration, because that's how we store up water for plants to be able, plant roots, crops, to be able to take that water up from the soil. Okay, so that's our soils exercise. We've gone through all 6 of them and talked about what we would expect to see and why we might have seen different things, one from the other. Maybe we should just check in on the time with Megan if we're going to go on and talk about slope and why we care about this characteristic.
Thanks so much, Laura and Drew, for leading us through that exercise. It is 2:56. I just wanted to check in with Letty. I know we want to save some time for the Q&A. So maybe we can just cover a couple of those slides very quickly and then head into the Q&A. So team, we'll race through these slides so we can leave some time for questions.
All right. Do we?
So we'll talk about why we care.
Yeah, so Drew, if you would kind of just segue into why we care, how these hydrophobicity tests could indicate erosion.
Sure. So the reason why we care about this is that slide that's in front of you right now, the erosion slide, and it's defined for you in terms of soil particles moving in the landscape. And erosion is is a natural force within the landscape. We can't completely control erosion. We can only hope to contain it in certain parts. And so in this instance, this is in Boulder Creek. This is the CZU fire aftermath on a road cut. And as you dropped your water droplets down onto your soil samples, I want you to think about it from a big picture perspective. When a raindrop hits that soil during this winter time, it's hitting the soil at about 30 miles per hour, which I don't know if you've ever been traveling at 30 miles an hour and had to hit your brakes, but it's quite an impact. And that's what happens every winter when we get our rains. And when we have a soil like this, and somebody raised the question earlier, what happens when you have a soil that's hydrophobic, that's not able to take that water in? It hits the soil, and it sheet flows off of the soil, and it probably takes some other soil particles with it. And you get enough of those events happening, and you start to get landslides or debris flows where it starts to pick up, or where you end up in these what we call hollows or draws. And you can get a lot of these events happening at once. And if you get really intense rainfall, that's where you start to see these landslides and debris flows. And we'll talk about that here in just a second. But yeah, so one of the things that we're really keyed in on is slope, and how we want to be able to determine what the level of slope is for a particular area. And you can kind of get a sense as to how steep that slope is, but not really. Again, we're doing this remotely, but it gives you sort of a rubric, a framework for determining what the different categories are of slope. If we had you out in the field, we could give you a clinometer, and you could size up the slope based on the eye level of the person the person that walks down slope. And there's degree slope, and there's percent slope. And again, I'm sorry we have to rush through this, but that gives you a broad introduction to that topic. And let's go on to the next one. We brought up a little bit of landslides and debris flow. If you get a chance, this is a really nice website, and you can zoom to areas where you live and see how you fit into the probability of having a landslide. And thanks, Letty, for putting that up for folks. On the right is a picture just north of the Golden Gate Bridge in Marin County. This happened in 1982. A bunch of you probably were never even thought of at that point. I was 12. And yeah, it's nowhere you want to be. So please take this seriously. Landslides and debris flows are a natural part of the landscape. They are an erosion process, but they're nowhere that you want to be when it's happening. So you need to take precautions. You need to be aware of where you are on the landscape when these kinds of things are taking place. And we'll go to the next slide. A lot of people want to put in, they want to try to control erosion, right? And culverts and retention walls are really common, very good engineering practices to try and channel water away from a particular area, say a home. And on the right, you can see where the person's kneeling. That used to be a home, and the retention wall is burned out. You can see on the left, maybe 3 of those boards that are still left. But this is an engineering practice that's going to need an engineer to design the repair of that wall. And we always refer people to engineers. We don't try to make broad statements about what needs to be done in those particular instances. And the culvert is channeling water typically under a road, and you want to make sure that you get that engineered correctly as well. So very, very quickly going through those why we care about what's happening in our soils and with the vegetation. And I think I am going to pass it back over to Megan to wrap us up. So thanks, Megan.
Thanks, Drew. So yeah, I just wanted to close with just a review of what we learned today. You learned a little bit about what NRCS and RCD services are offered to the community. We talked about the 2020 fires. We discussed the safety that needs to be kept in mind when going to a post-fire site. We talked about how to do a post-fire assessment, and we talked about to evaluate soil, and then also some of the careers that might be involved in doing some of these post-fire assessments. So in conclusion, I'd just like, if we have time, real quick, to just wrap it up, Laura and Drew.
Super quickly. So as we said, you guys are the upcoming generation, in conclusion. And as you are preparing for careers, there's a whole wide range of careers around natural resources, and that we touched on today. And in all of those, you may have a role, you may have an opportunity to shape policy, to make management decisions that acknowledge the impacts of climate change that we are experiencing and how climate change is affecting the natural ecological communities in California, which are fire adapted, as we discussed, and learning to live with fire, and as well as to live with and manage changes in rainfall patterns and changes in temperature patterns that we're experiencing, making management decisions that sometimes have us actually stand back and allow fire to be a natural process, or to make fire a part of a co-managed process through prescribed burning. Making management and policy decisions in your futures that make it possible for us to live with fire and with water and rainfall and changes that we might experience with climate change in a sustainable and safe way.
And I'm just going to share really quickly a story of someone that I met. His name was Nick, and he was somebody that I met right off the bat, probably my second day going out in the field. And my first day was all about meeting landowners that wanted to rebuild their homes regardless of how the fire affected them. Some homes were actually right on a creek, literally like right over a creek. And Nick asked me this question, and it took me a moment. It took me back. He, instead of asking me about how he wanted to rebuild his home, he asked me how he could live sustainably in the forest going forward if he did rebuild his home. And it just got me thinking about how we all need to be thinking like Nick about living sustainably in our environment, whether it's in a forest, whether it's on ag land, whether it's right next to a stream. These are all really important questions. And Nick actually lost his home. He was a fairly young person, I think in his early 30s. So it was his very first home that he lost. And it was, I think it's an important question that we all have to ask ourselves. And fortunately for you, you have a long time to be stewing over these questions. And as Laura mentioned, you're the next generation. You will have to grapple with these issues of how to live sustainably on your landscapes. And we really appreciate all your attention today. We appreciate you being interested in this, and hopefully you took something from our presentation today that might be interesting to you, that you might want to follow back up on. I'm always available for questions, and I think we will open it up to questions now. Thank you again for your attention.
I have a question.
All right, go ahead.
What happens when the soil is pronounced high hydrophobia? What happens to that soil?
Okay, so when we evaluate soil and we observe that it has a hydrophobic characteristic, it has implications for how we can manage that soil and what we can expect in terms of how it's going to react to rainfall and to water on the landscape. So as Drew was saying, if a soil is hydrophobic and it rejects water, it repels water, as rain falls on that soil, it's going to sheet off of it. That rain is going to move rapidly across the landscape and collect together into streams, then rivers. It can create flood conditions potentially. But we know that in a situation where there's a soil on a landscape that's hydrophobic, and we've observed that, we can predict something about how rainfall is going to act on that landscape. Drew, would you say anything else?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I agree with everything you just said. One of the things that people, when you tell them that they have a hydrophobic soil, they're like, oh, is that bad? And I try to shy away from value judgments about whether something's good or bad in terms of that. And from a broad perspective, yes, as we talked about, and Laura talked about, when a raindrop hits a soil that's hydrophobic, it will sheet off, right, and start collecting other soil particles to potentially create landslides or debris flows. It takes a lot of those to happen, and it's the soils that are hydrophobic. They will, in some circumstances, you don't want a hill slope to be infiltrating water after a very high or a high burn severity fire comes through. You don't want that hill slope to be extra laden with the water, even though in normal circumstances you do want that water to infiltrate. In a lot of cases, that's a really good thing for the soils to be exhibiting hydrophobicity. So just kind of keeping both sides of your mind open in terms of what's happening with soil hydrophilicity and soil hydrophobicity. Does that help?
Yeah.
Answer?
Yeah, a lot of big words, but I understood.
And then also, real quick, I just wanted to add, this is a note from Paul, that the soil after a fire won't necessarily be hydrophobic forever. Is that right, Drew? So it might just be a temporary condition for a certain period of time.
That's correct. Yeah, that's a great point. So it's typically, I think they say, depending on the severity and depending on your soil textures, depending on how much gas entered the soil airspace, as we saw from our exercise here today, like what we were talking about, we took the soils out of the landscape. When it was in the landscape, it was hydrophobic, and then those gases degassed, if you will, depending on how they were kept. And so it will gradually get back to its equilibrium state, if you will. But it does take some time, depending on soil texture, depending on how severe that burn was.
Have there ever been cases for farm area where the soil has become hydrophobic?
So generally what will happen in an agricultural setting is that you might start out with a soil that has some hydrophobicity or that has poor infiltration, and the goal for managing that soil over time would be to reduce that characteristic so that it would have better infiltration. And a way to do that is the introduction of a highly decomposed organic matter, so adding compost. Oftentimes, sometimes to improve infiltration, soil is tilled. That's been a practice that's been done over time to increase infiltration, but that doesn't really have an effect on the hydrophobic characteristics. It would be through organic matter management, basically, that we would modify or manage agricultural soils if they exhibited hydrophobicity.
Okay, thank you. I have one more. I'm sorry. I'm really curious about this. But you stated a lot of different careers in this. For me, I personally grew up with agriculture, so it's kind of something that I grew up with and I kind of like, but it's not my career path. My career path would want to be something to do with law or lawyers. Would that have something to do with something here, or?
So I would say definitely that legal professionals are going to be very important around interpreting and possibly setting policy and management decisions that are made around where communities are built and how communities are built in a landscape where we know that fire is a part of the ecology, for example. Many other ways I can imagine that would be a relevant career for natural resource considerations.
I'd just like to chime in real quick. When I worked as an environmental consultant, actually, I worked on a project where we were assessing fire scars, burn scars on oak trees on a big 15,000 acre property. And the landowner was suing the electrical company. So it was a power company that had power lines that caused a fire on their property. And so there was a huge lawsuit where they were assessing the damage to all the trees on the property. And so that was a perfect example of where, the legal system got involved in a fire and figuring out who was liable. And I think that's relatively common, especially when they're man-made fires.
And how many years of school would it be to become something like Miss Laura or Mr. Mather would be, or you, Miss Baker? How many years of schooling would that take?
I think that just depends on the path that you take, but I have a master's degree, and so I went through a bachelor's degree, so that's generally about a 4-year program, and then another 2 or 3 years in a master's program.
I also have a master's degree, but I think, you know, you could work in the field with a bachelor's degree too. Not everybody has a master's degree.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you.
And then,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I was just saying thank you, but you go right.
Oh, I was going to say, I like Laura and Megan. I have a master's degree too, so 4 years of undergrad. If you take, I guess, courses in high school, you can kind of go maybe a little bit quicker through your undergrad, say 3 years, if you're really lucky, and then 2 to 3 years for your master's degree. But like Megan's saying, a lot of the conservation work doesn't require you to have a master's degree, but it definitely helps, I think, in certain positions. So yeah, I'd say on average between 3 to 6 years of additional schooling past high school.
All right, well, thank you for answering all my questions.
Thanks for your questions. Do we have time for any more, Letty?
Well, if anybody has any last questions for our speakers, we're a little over time here. Teachers, comments? All right. I know, in interest of respecting everybody's time, we are over. But if you guys can, students, if you can fill out your worksheets and have them sent in to your teachers.
There is one more question in the chat from Diego.
Oh, awesome.
What effect?
Diego, would you like? Oh, go ahead.
I don't know if Diego's mic works right now. Diego, should I just read this out, or do you want to ask?
Oh, I just had a question. It was, what effect does the fire have on soil's density and composition? Like, how does it change, like, internally? Like, how are the nutrients changing the soil? I just wanted to know that.
So I would ask Drew to go ahead and start with an answer if you'd like.
Yeah, that's a great question. And a lot of what happens with, it depends on what the vegetation is that burned in terms of what nutrients are released. But typically, and Laura, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think a lot of woods contain a lot of potassium and some calcium, some of the minor nutrients like magnesium and boron and other things that are being taken up from those deep root structures to form the plant. Those are my initial thoughts in terms of the actual nutrients. Probably some phosphorus. It's very as you'll see when you have these quote unquote slash and burn events, say in a forest where you chop down the vegetation and burn it. You're releasing a lot of those nutrients from the plants themselves, and the next flush of growth takes advantage of those nutrients from the fire. And it kind of speaks to what Laura was saying. It's a natural part of our ecosystem for that to happen, to have these quote unquote prescribed burns or lightning strike fires that basically burn through this understory and release those nutrients back into the soil.
Definitely. And then on the question around density, soil density, the fire itself won't really impact soil density, but what happens after the fire on the landscape can impact the density. If compaction happens because of rainfall events or because of equipment and human intervention, because after a fire, the soil might be more fragile. It might, especially in the surface, it might have burned up organic matter that was in the surface, which provided some buffering. And if that has disappeared, then it is more vulnerable to compaction, which could increase the density.
if you put your shovel into say like a low to moderate burn severity soil, you'll still pull up quite a few roots. They're still intact. They're still holding the soil, even though you may not see a lot of vegetation on the surface. But it is a little bit harder to get that shovel in the ground, as I've been finding, just digging in the low to moderate to high burn severity soils. So it does sort of seems like it does almost like turning it into more of a hard compacted brick like structure to try to get through.
All right. I think that's all the time we have. Thanks, Letty, for organizing this.
Of course. Thank you, students, for being here. If you can say thank you before you leave, that would be great.
Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was awesome. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. It's great. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, it's good to meet everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been a great experience.
Thanks, guys. It was really fun.
You're welcome.
Have a good afternoon.
All right.
Happy holidays.
Be safe.